learning is a constant and ongoing process, and it's also a messy process. It doesn't look the same for every person. There isn't a recipe that you can follow, and at the end, out comes learning from the oven. You know what I mean?
Josh Eyler is Director of Faculty Development and Director of the ThinkForward Quality Enhancement Plan at the University of Mississippi. Shout out Ole Miss. I believe that's the Rebels. Where he's also on the faculty in the Department of Teacher Education. He previously worked on teaching and learning initiatives at Columbus State, George Mason, and Rice. His research interests include the biological basis of learning, evidence-based pedagogy, and disability studies. He's also the author, and this is how I came across Josh, of a pretty awesome book called How Humans Learn: The Science and Stories Behind Effective College Teaching. Josh is a frequent speaker and often consults with centers for teaching and learning and covers a wide array of topics. Obviously, we care about the topic that Josh is talking about because now more than ever in the future of work, we need to be basing how we develop training programs on something other than just what happened to us happens to other people. In the opening to his book, he says that in the process of writing this book, he surveyed research in fields ranging from developmental psychology, anthropology, and cognitive neuroscience for insights into the science behind learning. In the future of work, we got to make sure we're developing managers and leaders to be great coaches and teachers. Who better to talk to than Josh, someone who leads a center for teaching excellence and spends his time all the time thinking about how we build better teachers. The best managers are coaches. The best coaches are great teachers. Today, more than ever, there's some really powerful insights that come behind Josh's work and the conversation you're about to hear. Here's Josh Eyler. Let's bring it in.
So I guess, Josh, to kick us off, you mind sharing how you got to where you sit today as the Director of Faculty Development at the University of Mississippi?
Sure. It's been kind of a winding path, but I started out in college and then graduate school studying literature, and my first position was as a faculty member at an institution in Georgia. But when I was there working with those students, it was just clear the power that good teaching had to really help students transform their lives and really pursue lives that they found meaningful and purposeful. So I became interested in moving beyond my own classroom and trying to scale that experience for as many students and as many faculty as possible. Develop strategies that are more aligned with the evidence on effective teaching practices, and to kind of weave together a series of programs and services that can help faculty be better teachers and thus students be better learners.
I have your book, How Humans Learn, here.
Great. Thank you.
Why'd you write it?
I became a dad right around the time that I started to write the book, and watching my daughter explore the world as a baby, where everything was just so urgent. Learning was very present for her at every moment of her life. That just that sparked a lot of ideas about, well, where does that go? What happens to that? If this is the way we are as babies, what happens as we grow older that changes the game of learning? And that was a question that kind of I think drove part of the work on this book.
So without giving the whole book away, I guess what were the biggest takeaways you were trying to deliver to readers around what we're doing right and what we could be doing better?
Right. Well, one thing that really is in the background of that is that I'm not a scientist, and that was clear every moment of my work on this book. But what I really deeply wanted was for scientists to read it and to find what I was saying credible. They didn't have to buy it. They didn't have to, they could argue with it, but they needed to find it credible. And so that meant I had to teach myself a lot about these disciplines, and I had to rely on friends and colleagues who are in those disciplines to teach me. So that's kind of the first thing, because all of this is rooted in the science and biology of how people learn. And as I was following that research and sort of teaching and learning myself along the way, there are 5 areas that kept coming up to the surface of all this research. 5 fundamental attributes of learning, and they were curiosity, sociality, which is really just our social nature as human beings. We're a deeply social species. We need other people, and at no point has that ever been more apparent than over the last 12 months when we have been distanced from other people, observing its effect on learning and work. So those were two. Emotion was another one, and then authenticity and failure. And those that last one in particular, I think we know intuitively about the learning process that in order to learn something effectively, we try something out, we get it wrong, we get feedback on what went wrong, and then we try it again. And although we know it intuitively, though, our school systems, our educational systems are set up in exactly the opposite direction. That we don't prioritize making mistakes in order to learn from them. We actually penalize the making of mistakes. That's kind of the bedrock on which schools are built. And so what I wanted to do was try and find our way back to a process and a method of teaching that honored our ability to make mistakes and to fail in safe environments that would then allow us to take the intellectual risks that we really learn from. And so that was kind of the end note of the book. And I think it's I like to think that it was a hopeful look, that there's possibility to build on all of these areas. And if we just keep these kinds of premises in mind, anyone can be a great teacher and any student can learn effectively.
Failure section was my favorite.
Oh, good. It was certainly interesting to write about because, it's just not the way we're taught, right? And so, but there I was finding all this scientific research and then teaching literature as well about just how important it is.
And you also bring up the sort of roots of lecturing, which I found interesting because especially in workforce, so much of job training is done stand and deliver, and there is a test, but it's done once and then usually not over again. So I thought that was really interesting because I feel like being afraid of failure as a instructor, a teacher, a coach is it's a poor trait. Like you need to embrace it. I think that was one of my big takeaways. You talked about our brains being designed to construct knowledge from errors.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and I really like your point there about having that attribute as a teacher or a coach or a trainer as well, because most of what we know about effective teaching happens only when the person at the front of the room begins to let go of some of that control and give it over to the students or the trainees or the players. And when the teacher does that, there's lots of ways that it can go wrong and mistakes can be made, but the more comfortable you get with that kind of context, the more people are going to learn. You have to give them, in order to learn anything, people have to be active participants in the building of that knowledge. And so, the teacher, the trainer, the coach has to let go of some of that fear of failure to help the students.
I want to get your opinion on this because I feel that even the word learning, I'd love to get your opinion on like what the true meaning of that word is, because even in a capacity where you might be teaching a new lesson or company might be, quote, training a new hire to perform a task, there's this perspective that learning has to happen in a certain order, in a certain way. And even on failure, a lot of companies that might do on the job training where they encourage failure and error will say things like, well, you got to learn it before you do it. But doesn't learning kind of happen? Isn't it constant? I don't know. I want to get your opinion on this because the way the word learning gets thrown around could be confusing.
Right. Yeah. I'm with you on that. Learning is a constant an ongoing process, and it's also a messy process. It doesn't look the same for every person. There isn't a recipe that you can follow, and at the end, out comes learning from the oven. You know what I mean? It's very different in what it looks like for people. And so and you'll see that unfold over time, and it's kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and you keep making that progress. But in no way does kind of a test at the end of a unit or a module a talk about the potential of someone as a learner, or b capture what they really have the potential to learn about that subject. And the other point that I thought you made there that was really important is, while it is true that you can memorize and learn some material and then be asked to apply it to a situation, the more authentic kind of learning happens in those environments where students are doing as they're learning. And the reason for that is that our brains are really good at figuring out what is kind of an authentic learning environment and what is inauthentic. And authentic in this case simply means, am I doing the thing that I'm learning about? Am I applying the material that I'm learning about? Am I in a real situation? And that is an iterative process, but it is the way that we truly build learning, or the way that learning happens. And as to the definition, depending on where you look, you get a completely different definition of learning. The only thing that I think scientists agree on is that when learning actually happens, our brains physically change, that there are new neuron networks built. It looks different. You never are again the same person that you were biologically after you learn something. It's kind of a fabulous thing. It's just fascinating to me.
I wish we had I don't want to say certificate, because sometimes that might not mean much, but a formal training for any leader or manager in how learning, and your book is a great, it kind of comes right down the middle for here. But sure. I feel like required training should be to understand how does, like you just mentioned, the messy process unfold, because it really makes you rethink when you coach and mentor and try to instruct. I have a 4-year-old daughter, same thing, right. Makes me think about play, which you talk about also.
Yes, definitely. Play is an important part of the way children learn, but it's also, because of that, built into kind of our fabric of how we continue to learn throughout our lives. And so environments, it doesn't just have to be a classroom, it can be any training or coaching context, any one of those environments that privileges play and creates learning opportunities that are also games, tap into a really important part of the way human beings have always learned. And so I think that we sort of don't pay enough attention to that particular attribute, that if it can be fun, if it can be made into a game, if it, some playful competition there, we're more likely to focus our attention and focus our energy on learning what we need to know to perform at our best in that game.
Yeah, our team got an email the other day from an angry HR person who made the comment, training shouldn't be fun. It's serious. And it was a restaurant, by the way, just so we're not talking about, we're not even talking about more serious trainings or situations. This isn't, for the Air Force, for example, it's staff training for a restaurant. And I don't know what to say back to that.
Oh, I wonder what the employees think about that, actually. Yeah.
I want to, for some takeaways for folks, I want to maybe paint a picture. Say I'm a new director of training for a company, Josh, and I'm, going through what many are right now, restarting our workforce, or opening up our, stores that may have closed, or maybe in some cases building the manuals from scratch. Any recommendations you have for me?
Yeah, a couple, I think. Well, the one thing that we are finding in educational settings that I think probably can apply is that every single employee at every company and organization has been through a really hard traumatic experience, and so I think letting people talk about that experience and what they may have learned about what it is to work in your field during that time can be a really productive way to lead into the training. Okay, here's been our experience. What have we learned? What worked? What didn't work? And let's use that. Let's use our real experiences to shape a training program going forward, one that honors the experiences that we've all had. So I think that's something that can really help. Another thing, though, is that because we've been distanced from folks, even though we talked on Zoom, it's just different. We register it very differently, and so that might be something to respond to when setting up a new training program that really build more collaboration into the program, team-based learning, like we were just talking about, ways to make it more fun. I think that is something that is probably should be at the forefront, especially if you're building again or about to start. This is a moment that doesn't come around very often, and it's a moment to wipe the slate clean and to build something that benefits from the knowledge that we've gained over this time.
Empathy, like kind of being able to
Mhm.
look at the world from the perspective of the people you're coaching or training is really important. Sometimes we forget the student or the learner in the pursuit of just delivery. It feels like at times.
Yes, yes, I see it all the time, and I understand that people are just trying to get hit the goals, get through the semester, that sort of thing. But if we don't think about the people who we're working with and talking to and teaching or training, um, then what we lose sight of the purpose for the work that we are doing. That it is not simply to spout content and to check the box that you did this particular session, excuse me. It is to, in fact, make sure that whoever we're working with has learned the material. And we can only do that, I think, if we start with being empathetic for the people who are across the way from us.
On the learning material point, it
Mhm.
raises a question around measurement. How do you measure an effective, successful teacher from one that isn't? In the same way, maybe an effective trainer or coach from one who isn't. What are the areas, or are there any specific metrics you can look to?
That is a really that's a really open question right now in the educational world. What is an effective way to show the impact? And I think there are a couple of areas that we can look at, and one is seeing the results uh, after the training or after the workshop or after the class. So if the students who I've worked with then go on to utilize what they learned in my class in their other classes, then that's an effective measurement of how effective of my strength as a teacher. Uh, and the same could be true for any training setting. The issue with that is that's the long game of measurement, right? That's you have to we're talking about looking at it over a very long time. More immediate term, though, I think that what we've discovered is that there's no one single measurement that you can really point to. So student evaluations come up all the time, but they also are fraught with bias and other issues depending on the questions that are used. So looking at it from multiple angles, you get the student feedback, you have individual kind of reflection on your own teaching, and then you have peer observation. And so a combination of those approaches is our best bet right now for being able to show how someone's actually doing in the classroom. And then if I had to just point one thing that I know of that is out there that people use that I think is productive in terms of measurement or effective, looking at it. So if we know what works and we have science-based, evidence-based information on what works in a particular classroom setting or educational context, then a specific measurement that we can use is if we sit and watch what happens in that educational setting, we should be able to note the things that are happening, right? And so if we see those the attributes that we know are rooted in the evidence, then that is an effective measurement, right? We don't have to actually assess the learners at that point, because what we see is already rooted in the best evidence we have of how people learn. But if we don't see those things, then we have another good measurement of the developmental needs for that particular teacher or trainer.
Sure. Josh, great stuff. Highly recommend, like I said, we recommend your book and mail it to everybody we can. Last question for you. What's the next book?
Oh, actually, I'm writing one right now on grades and kind of a bird's eye view from kindergarten up through grad school of the issues that grades and evaluations, the obstacles that they can set up for kids.
Very good. Well, I look forward to picking that one up next.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Sam.
Thanks, Josh.
Okay, bye.
Josh said failure can be one of our biggest allies in learning if we utilize it appropriately, saying mistakes are not only opportunities for learning, but also time when our brains grow, even if we don't know we made a mistake. He goes on to talk about this in his book, something called failure-based pedagogies. It's a pretty interesting concept. It's pretty interesting to me because we live in a world where too often our training and development programs, the programs with which we invest in to, quote, deliver learning, often kind of follow the same model. You know, it's watch, regurgitate, and move on. And so much about what Josh is talking about, I think I react to in two ways. One, that there's a hell of a lot more for all of us to learn and understand about the science of learning. And number two, if we're in the business of getting the most out of our people, if your job description has something to do with impacting others around you, to coach them, to develop them, to get them to do something more consistently, to get them to do the right thing, the right way, the right time, every time, then you need to dig into books like How Humans Learn by Josh Eyler, The Science and Stories Behind Effective College Teaching. You can pick it up at your local bookstore.